Welcome to the haunting room, where fear and mystery await. Turn off the lights, grab your courage, and prepare yourself for stories that will leave you trembling. Enter if you dare. What you hear next might just haunt you forever. Now, let's dive into today's terrifying tales. Thanksgiving had always been a big deal for my family. This year, though, it was just my mom, my dad, and me. My sister Emily couldn't make it back from college, and my grandparents were snowed in upstate. It felt odd, celebrating without the usual crowd, but we made the best of it. Dinner was quiet, but cozy. Turkey, stuffing, mashed potatoes, the works. Afterward, my parents went to the living room to watch football while I stayed behind to clear the table. The clatter of dishes and the muffled sound of the TV filled the air as I carried the leftovers into the kitchen. That's when I first heard it, a faint shuffling sound. It came from the direction of the back door. I paused, listening. It could have been the wind or an animal. We lived in a quiet neighborhood surrounded by woods, and strange noises weren't uncommon. Still, something about it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I glanced at the door, double-checking the lock, secure. Shaking it off, I went back to putting the food away. But the sound came again, louder this time, like footsteps on leaves. I turned toward the window over the sink. It was pitch black outside, the backyard swallowed by darkness. I couldn't see anything, but I felt like something or someone was out there, watching. "Mom, Dad?" I called, trying to keep my voice steady. "What is it?" My dad answered from the other room. "I think someone's outside." The TV clicked off, and my parents came into the kitchen. My dad went to the back door, peering through the window. "I don't see anything," he said after a moment. "Are you sure?" I asked, still uneasy. "It's probably just the wind," my mom added. "Let's finish cleaning up." They went back to the living room, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I locked up the rest of the house, checking every door and window twice. Everything was secure, but the unease lingered. Later that night, I was in my room scrolling through my phone when I heard it again. A faint, deliberate creak. Not from outside this time, but from inside the house. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The sound came again, closer. I crept to my door and opened it just a crack. The hallway was dark, the only light coming from under my parents' bedroom door. "Mom? Dad?" I whispered. No response. I stepped into the hallway, my bare feet silent on the carpet. The house was eerily quiet, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. As I neared the living room, the creaking sound stopped. The air felt heavy, like something unseen was pressing down on me. And then I saw it. The back door was open, not just unlocked, wide open, letting in the cold November air. My stomach churned. I knew I had locked it. "Mom! Dad!" I shouted, running back toward their room. I threw open their door, but the bed was empty. The blankets were pulled back and the room was eerily still. "Mom," I whispered, panic rising in my chest. That's when I heard the voice. "You shouldn't have left the leftovers." It was low and guttural, coming from somewhere behind me. I turned slowly, my legs shaking. Standing in the hallway was a figure. At first I thought it was a man, but the longer I looked, the less human it seemed. Its skin was pale and stretched tightly over its frame, its eyes black and hollow. Its mouth twisted into a grotesque grin, revealing sharp yellow teeth. In its hands, it held a piece of turkey. "Waste not, want not," it rasped, taking a slow, deliberate bite. I screamed and bolted past it, running for the front door. As I fumbled with the lock, I heard it behind me, its footsteps unnaturally heavy, like it was dragging something. I wrenched the door open and ran into the night, the cold air stinging my face. I didn't stop until I reached the neighbor's house. The police searched our house, but found no trace of my parents, or the thing I saw. The back door was closed and locked when they arrived, with no sign of forced entry. I stayed with my grandparents after that, refusing to go back to the house. A few days later, I overheard them talking in hushed tones about what the police had found. A single plate of untouched Thanksgiving leftovers sitting in the middle of the dining room table, and next to it, written in greasy, black letters, was a single word: "Thanks." Thanksgiving was always a small, quiet affair for me and my wife, Claire. This year, it was just the two of us. Claire's parents had passed away years ago, and mine were halfway across the country, too old to make the trip. We didn't mind, though. We liked it simple. The day was peaceful, cooking together, sipping wine, and watching the parade. By evening, the table was set and the food was ready. Turkey, stuffing, mashed potatoes, and pumpkin pie. Claire lit a couple of candles and we sat down to eat. That's when we heard it, a soft knock at the front door. Claire and I exchanged a glance. It was unusual. We didn't expect anyone. Our house was in a rural area, set back from the main road. Trick-or-treaters didn't come here and we weren't close enough with the neighbors for drop-ins. "Did you invite someone?" I asked. "No," she said, standing up slowly. The knock came again, louder this time. "Stay here," I said, my stomach twisting. I went to the door and peered through the peephole. A man stood on the porch. He was in his late 40s with unkempt hair and a worn, dirty coat. He wasn't holding anything. No bag, no papers, nothing. "Can I help you?" I called through the door. He leaned closer to the peephole, his eye almost pressed against it. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said. His voice was rough but polite. "My car broke down a mile back. Could I use your phone?" The story was plausible enough. The main road was dark and lonely and there weren't many houses nearby, but something about him put me on edge. "I'll call someone for you," I offered. "Who do you need me to contact?" He hesitated. "That's kind of you," he said after a moment, "but it'd be easier if I came inside. It's cold out here." That uneasy feeling sharpened. "I'll grab a phone," I said, keeping my tone steady. "Wait there." I walked back to the kitchen, thinking where Claire was watching me nervously. "Who is it?" she whispered. "Some guy. Says his car broke down." She frowned. "Should we let him in?" I shook my head. "Something feels off." I returned to the door with my cell phone. "Who do you need me to call?" I asked again. This time, he didn't answer. I pressed my ear to the door, listening. The porch was silent. "Hello?" I called. Still nothing. I opened the door just a crack, careful to keep the chain on. The porch was empty. A chill ran down my spine as I closed and locked the door. I checked the windows, but the yard was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the porch lamp. "He's gone," I told Claire, trying to sound casual. "Probably found another house." But as we sat back down to eat, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Halfway through dinner, I thought I heard a creak from upstairs. Claire looked up, her fork paused midair. "Did you hear that?" I nodded, standing slowly. The sound came again, a faint, deliberate creak of floorboards. I grabbed the heavy carving knife from the table and motioned for Claire to stay put. My heart was pounding as I climbed the stairs, every step feeling louder than the last. At the top of the staircase, I stopped and listened. The house was eerily quiet. I checked each room, the guest bedroom, the bathroom, the office, nothing. Finally, I opened the door to our bedroom. My stomach dropped. The closet door was open and the man from the porch was standing inside, staring at me. "Thanks for letting me in," he said, smiling. I barely had time to react before he lunged at me. I swung the knife wildly, slashing his arm. He yelped and staggered back, clutching the wound. I bolted down the stairs, yelling for Claire to run. She was already at the front door, fumbling with the locks. We made it outside and sprinted to the neighbor's house. They called the police, who arrived quickly and searched our home. They found no sign of the man. But in the closet, tucked beneath a pile of clothes, they discovered a small bag. Inside were a rope, duct tape, and a long, serrated knife. The officer shook his head grimly as he showed us. "Looks like he wasn't just looking for a phone," he said. Claire and I stayed with the neighbors that night. We never slept in that house again. Now, every Thanksgiving, I remember the man's chilling words, "Thanks for letting me in." It was the first Thanksgiving at my new apartment. I had moved to a small old building in a quiet town after my divorce. The neighbors were friendly but mostly kept to themselves, which suited me just fine. Thanksgiving wasn't going to be a big affair for me this year. My family was out of state and I didn't feel like traveling, so I decided to spend the day cooking a small meal for myself, enjoying some wine and binge watching old movies. The day went well. The turkey breast roasted perfectly. The mashed potatoes were fluffy, and I even baked a pie, something I'd never tried before. By evening, the apartment smelled warm and inviting, a contrast to the chilly November air outside. After finishing my meal, I settled onto the couch with a blanket and a glass of wine. The soft hum of the heater and the low murmur of the TV filled the room. That's when I heard it. 3 slow, deliberate knocks at the door. I froze. It was nearly 9 p.m. and I wasn't expecting anyone. Who would be visiting this late on Thanksgiving? For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but then the knocks came again, louder this time. Reluctantly, I got up and approached the door. "Who is it?" I called out, trying to sound confident. No answer. I checked the peephole, but saw only darkness. My hallway light was on, so whoever was out there had to be standing off to the side. "Hello?" I called again, my voice cracking slightly. Still nothing. I felt a chill that wasn't from the cold. Something wasn't right. I flipped the deadbolt and stepped back, deciding not to open it. A moment later, I heard footsteps moving away, slow and heavy, like whoever it was wanted me to hear them leave. I waited a few minutes, listening intently, before cautiously opening the door. The hallway was empty, but a faint smell lingered, something metallic and sickly sweet. It reminded me of rust. I shut the door, locked it, and double-checked the windows. Feeling uneasy, I turned off the TV and decided to head to bed early. But as I lay in the dark, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Around midnight, I woke up to a faint scratching sound. At first, I thought it was the heater, but as I sat up, the sound became clearer. It was coming from the front door. Someone was dragging something sharp along the wood, back and forth, in slow, deliberate strokes. My heart pounded as I grabbed my phone and crept toward the door. The scratching stopped the moment I approached. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice trembling. Silence. I held my breath, listening. Then from the other side of the door, a voice whispered, "Can I come in? It's cold out here." It was a man's voice, soft and raspy. My throat tightened. "Go away, I'm calling the police." He laughed, a low, guttural sound that made my skin crawl. "You already let me in?" he said. A cold wave of terror washed over me. I spun around, scanning the dark apartment. That's when I saw it. The closet door in the hallway, which I was certain I'd left closed, was now slightly ajar. I backed away slowly, gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. My fingers fumbled as I tried to dial 911. Before I could finish, the closet door creaked open. A man stepped out. His face was pale and gaunt, his clothes filthy and stained. He held a long, rusted knife in one hand, and his lips curled into a twisted grin. "Happy Thanksgiving," he said. I screamed and threw my phone at him, bolting for the front door. I fumbled with the lock, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I could hear him behind me, his heavy footsteps closing in. Finally, I wrenched the door open and sprinted into the hallway, screaming for help. One of my neighbors, an older man, opened his door and saw me running. He stepped out, wielding a baseball bat, just as the stranger emerged from my apartment. The intruder froze for a moment, then turned and bolted down the stairwell. The police arrived within minutes, but they never found him. All they discovered in the closet were a dirty blanket, some food wrappers, and a small notebook filled with scribbled drawings of my apartment. Apparently, he'd been living in my walls for weeks. I moved out the next day. Now, every Thanksgiving, I double-check every closet, every cabinet, and every dark corner of my home, because you never know who might be spending the holiday with you. The drive to my parents' house for Thanksgiving was always long and lonely. They lived in the middle of nowhere. Fields and forests stretched for miles in every direction, with no sign of life other than the occasional passing car. This year, I had left later than usual, and darkness had already fallen by the time I reached the empty back roads leading to their home. The radio barely picked up a signal out there, so I drove in silence, the faint hum of the engine, my only companion. As I rounded a bend, my headlights caught a figure standing on the shoulder of the road. It was a man. He looked to be in his late 20s or early 30s, wearing a tattered jacket and jeans. He was holding a small duffel bag and had his thumb out, signaling for a ride. I'm not in the habit of picking up hitchhikers, especially on dark, deserted roads, but something about him made me hesitate. Maybe it was the way he looked directly at my car, his eyes wide and almost desperate. Against my better judgment, I slowed down and rolled down the passenger window. "You need help?" I called out. "Thanks," he said, stepping closer. "My car broke down a few miles back. I've been walking for hours. Could you give me a ride to the next town?" I hesitated, glancing at the empty road ahead. The nearest town was at least 20 minutes away. "Sure," I said finally. "Hop in." He smiled, a little too wide, and climbed into the passenger seat, tossing his bag at his feet. "Thanks a lot," he said, his voice casual but slightly hoarse. "It's freezing out there." I nodded and started driving again, gripping the wheel tightly. He smelled faintly of sweat and gasoline, and his jacket looked like it hadn't been washed in months. For a while, we rode in silence. I kept sneaking glances at him out of the corner of my eye. He was staring straight ahead, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "So," I said, trying to break the tension, "where are you headed?" "Just the next town," he replied curtly. I nodded and focused on the road. The silence between us grew heavier. After a few minutes, he spoke again. "You heading to see family?" "Yeah," I said. "Thanksgiving dinner." "Must be nice," he said, his tone flat. "You're not spending it with anyone?" I asked cautiously. He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. "No, not anymore." I decided not to press him. Something about his demeanor was starting to put me on edge. The road stretched endlessly ahead, and the darkness outside felt oppressive. I realized I hadn't seen another car for miles. Suddenly, the man shifted in his seat, turning to look at me. "Do you believe in fate?" he asked, his tone oddly calm. I glanced at him, startled by the question. "I guess," I said hesitantly. "Why?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I think everything happens for a reason," he said. "Like us meeting tonight, it feels meant to be." My grip on the wheel tightened. "What do you mean?" Before he could answer, he reached down and unzipped his duffel bag. My stomach dropped. "I need you to pull over," he said, his voice low and cold. "What? Why?" I asked, trying to keep my tone steady. He pulled a knife from the bag, its blade catching the dim light from the dashboard. "Because," he said, "we're going to switch places." My heart was pounding in my chest. "What are you talking about?" "You have a family waiting for you," he said, his eyes burning with intensity. "I don't, but I think I could be a good replacement." The meaning of his words hit me like a punch to the gut. He didn't just want my car, he wanted my life. My mind raced. I couldn't pull over. I had to think fast. I get it," I said, forcing my voice to stay calm. "But you don't have to do this. We can figure something out." He didn't answer. His grip on the knife tightened, and I saw his other hand reaching for the steering wheel. In a split-second decision, I slammed on the brakes. The sudden stop sent him lurching forward, and I used the moment to grab his arm and shove it away. The knife clattered to the floor, but he was strong, too strong. He lunged at me, his hands clawing for my throat. I fought back, kicking and thrashing until I managed to open the driver's side door and tumble out onto the road. The man scrambled after me, but I was faster. I sprinted into the darkness, my legs pumping harder than they ever had before. I didn't stop running until I saw headlights in the distance. I stumbled into the middle of the road, waving my arms wildly. The car screeched to a halt, and the driver, a middle-aged woman, jumped out, her face full of concern. I managed to choke out what had happened, and she quickly called the police. When they arrived and searched my car, the man was gone. All he'd left behind was the duffel bag, which contained nothing but a few tattered clothes and a single photo of a smiling family, none of whom were him. To this day, I don't know who he was or what he planned to do if I hadn't escaped. But every Thanksgiving, as I sit at the table with my family, I can't help but wonder, did he find someone else to take my place? Thanksgiving was supposed to be quiet this year. My parents were visiting my sister out of state, so I volunteered to house sit and prepare a small dinner for myself. I didn't mind. I enjoyed solitude and wasn't particularly close with my extended family anyway. The day had been uneventful. I spent the morning watching parades on TV, roasting a small turkey, and sipping cider. By the time the sun set, the house felt warm and cozy, the scent of sage and roasted vegetables filling the air. It was around 7 p.m. when I sat down to eat. I had just cut into the turkey when I heard a faint knock. It wasn't from the front door. The sound had come from the back, where the kitchen opened onto a deck that led to the backyard. The hairs on my arms stood on end. My parents lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood where nothing ever happened. Their backyard was surrounded by a tall wooden fence, and the back gate was always locked. Cautiously, I stood and walked to the sliding glass door. The curtains were drawn, so I couldn't see outside. "Hello?" I called out, trying to sound confident. No answer. I hesitated for a moment before pulling the curtain back slightly. The motion-activated porch light flicked on, illuminating the deck. There was no one there. Shaking my head, I closed the curtain and returned to the table. It was probably the wind, I told myself, or maybe a squirrel knocking something over, but as I sat down, I heard it again. Knock. Knock. This time, it was louder. My heart started racing. Someone was out there. I grabbed the largest knife I could find from the kitchen and approached the sliding door again. This time, I yanked the curtain open in one swift motion. A man was standing on the deck. He was tall and thin, with a scruffy beard and a filthy jacket. His face was partially obscured by the shadows, but his eyes gleamed in the harsh light. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my efforts to stay calm. He didn't respond. Instead, he stepped closer to the glass, placing a grimy hand against it. "I need to use your phone," he said. His voice was low and rough, like he hadn't spoken in days. "I'm sorry," I said, gripping the knife tighter. "I can't let you in. There's a gas station about a mile down the road. They'll have a phone." He didn't move. "Please," he said. "It's an emergency." There was something about his tone, flat, emotionless, that made my stomach churn. "I'll call someone for you," I offered. "Who do you need me to call?" He stared at me through the glass, his eyes unblinking. "No one," he said. Chills ran down my spine. "I think you should leave," I said firmly, stepping back from the door. Suddenly, he slammed his hand against the glass. The sound was deafening, and I jumped, nearly dropping the knife. "I need to come inside," he said, his voice rising. "Get out of here!" I shouted. He didn't move, his palm still pressed against the glass. I turned and grabbed my phone, dialing 911 with shaking fingers. As I explained the situation to the dispatcher, I kept my eyes on the sliding door. The man was gone. The police arrived about 10 minutes later. They searched the yard and the surrounding area but found no trace of the man. "You did the right thing not opening the door," one of the officers said. "But make sure everything's locked up tight tonight, just in case." I nodded, my hands still trembling as I locked every door and window in the house. The rest of the evening passed in uneasy silence. I tried to distract myself with TV, but every creak and groan of the house made me jump. It was around midnight when I decided to go to bed. I checked the locks one last time and turned off the lights before heading upstairs. As I climbed into bed, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a text message from my mom. "Hope everything's okay. Don't forget the back door lock sticks sometimes." I froze. The back door lock. I had checked it earlier, but I hadn't thought to double check. I grabbed the knife from my bedside table and crept downstairs, my heart hammering in my chest. When I reached the kitchen, I saw it immediately. The sliding glass door was open, just a crack, and muddy footprints led from the deck into the house. Thank you for joining us in the Haunting Room for another collection of spine-chilling tales. If you enjoyed the stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss the next terrifying episode. The darkness is always closer than it seems, and we'll be here, waiting. Until next time, stay haunted or not.